I think we're beginning the recording now. Is that right? All right. It's wonderful to see all of you guys here this morning. Welcome. I'm Maryke DesChamps. I'll be your worship associate this morning. Roz Cook was scheduled this morning, but she has been called out of town. So I want to thank you all for joining. It will be my pleasure soon to introduce Pax Whitmore, who will be our speaker this morning. Pax and his family have been members of our church for quite a few years. He has also shared his words with us on several other occasions, and he's a wonderful speaker, very enjoyable to listen to. Today, his intriguing sermon is entitled Star Wars Movie Trailer. He will discuss specifically how his own personal spiritual journey has been influenced by Star Trek, and why we should all consider pop culture worthy of spiritual study. Also, what lessons we can learn about acceptance from a sci-fi utopia. I think this will give us quite a bit to talk about during our virtual coffee hour at the end of the service. So if you're a Trekkie, you must be excited for this service. And if you don't even know what Trekkie means, then you're in for a real treat. And by the way, a Trekkie is someone who's very devoted to the Star Trek series. The opening words are from Captain Jean-Luc Picard, who is the captain of the starship USS Enterprise. And he said, "Live now. Make now always the most precious time. Now will never come again." Okay, we're going to move on to announcements, and Mandy has our first announcement today. Mandy, you're still on mute. Okay.
Yeah, Morgan, let me know. Sorry. Hello, good morning, everybody. I want to say thank you for showing up this Sunday morning. I know Star Trek's a very exciting topic. Very, very exciting. I do, unfortunately, have to make a little bit of sad announcement this morning. Next week's May 23rd will be Reverend Kathy's last sermon with us at West Valley UU. We have greatly appreciated your time with us here, Reverend Kathy, but she is moving on with other things, and we are actively in a search for a new supply minister at this time. Feel free to address any questions about our search to myself or Barry. Reverend Kathy is here this week, and she will be here next week if you want to speak with her about her decision to move on.
Well, we are sorry to hear that, and I'm sure she'll be greatly missed by everyone. I know I'm going to miss her.
Coming from me, I know I'm going to miss her greatly. I've loved every single thing I've been able to hear from Reverend Kathy over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Any other announcements this morning? Okay, we will now ask Paul if he'll light the chalice for us. Thank you, Paul. I will now share another quote from the Star Trek series. This one is from the original show that began in 1966, and the first captain of the Starship Enterprise, James T. Kirk. He was played by William Shatner. "You know, the greatest danger facing us is ourselves. and the irrational fear of the unknown. There is really no such thing as the unknown, only things temporarily hidden and temporarily not understood. Our church doesn't teach dogma or cling to specific beliefs about gods or God. We do, however, promise to make promises to ourselves and each other when we come together every Sunday. These are in the form of a covenant. The covenant will appear on the screen in a moment, and if you would please join me by reading it aloud. You will be muted, but I will read it aloud. Love is the doctrine of our congregation. The quest for truth is our holy right, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in friendship. Thus do we covenant. Also, every week, our church takes up an offering. We do this with intention during our Sunday service. The goal is to practice generosity and to weave our giving into the fabric of our Sunday rituals. We have so much to be grateful for. We seem to have survived the pandemic with our sanity mostly intact. Our building awaits us as we make plans to go back. We would love for the building and the grounds to be in good repair when we return. And so we make our offerings for the health and wealth of our physical church. Thank you so much in advance for your gifts and support. Okay. Joe, that was so beautiful, and I'm sorry it came to a bit of an abrupt end, but we truly enjoy always listening to you play. Thank you. I would like to now turn it over to our speaker, Pax Whitmore.
All right, good morning. I mean, technical glitches aside, that intro music just makes me feel like I can accomplish pretty much anything now, so I appreciate that. It's very cool to hear quotes from Star Trek that sound very in line with the types of things we would normally say and speak, and I think that speaks to the topic of the sermon here. But as always, it is a pleasure to be here, to see everyone taking some time out of your busy lives, and I guess it's summer now in Phoenix, for a few moments of reflection. Since this is my 4th time speaking, a lot of you probably know what to expect at this point. There'll be some politics, some jokes, some pop culture, and a healthy serving of the 2 core pillars of my spiritual philosophy, skepticism and stoicism. Today, though, I'm going to reach further back in my personal history and share some insight into how I got onto this path and what lessons we can carry forward. My spiritual origin story is this. While the core tenets of my philosophy have always been in my life, I didn't always have the words to describe them. Seneca and Epictetus didn't often appear in my Hebrew school curriculum, but I always preferred questions that couldn't be answered over answers that couldn't be questioned. I always tried to keep my emotions under my control instead of the other way around. And I always knew that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence. I didn't start my life with meditations or the 7 principles, but I did have the text that primed my intellectual pump, and that was Star Trek. Yes, Star Trek, the campy sci-fi show that started airing in 1966 and really has never stopped, blossoming into more than half a dozen spin-off series, 13 movies, countless books and games, and any medium you can imagine. I'll start by saying this. Spock, the logic-driven science officer whom I quoted in my sermon at my bar mitzvah, was a Stoic philosopher in all but name. And here are a few specific examples. In the past, I've referenced Marcus Aurelius's famous assertion, "What's bad for the hive is bad for the bee." This line is the core of the Stoic philosophy of sympatheia, that the actions of one affect all because we are all connected, and we have a duty to the greater good. Not only does that sound very close to the interdependent web of existence in the 7th UU principle, but consider this equally famous line from Spock in Star Trek. Quote, "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one." Here's another one from Marcus Aurelius. "Change and flux constantly remake the world just as the incessant progression of time remakes eternity." And now here's Spock. "Change is the essential process of all existence." And Marcus Aurelius again. "Choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been." And now Spock again. "Pain is a thing of the mind and the mind can be controlled." Spock wasn't the only member of Starfleet to express Stoic philosophy. Captain James T. Kirk asserted that our species can only survive if we have obstacles to overcome. Without them to strengthen us, we will weaken and die. Millennia earlier, Seneca wrote about feeling sorry for someone who had never experienced hardship because, quote, "You have passed through life without an opponent. No one can ever know what you are capable of, not even you." I could go on, but this should be some sufficient evidence to set the stage of the kind of philosophy to which my young mind was exposed in syndication and glorious Technicolor. That being said, it's one thing to say a TV show was important enough in my early life to where I actually have named my son James, but it's another thing entirely to argue that the same TV show and the vast universe of works that followed should be considered as a legitimate text of philosophy and spirituality. Allow me to make that argument now. When I was in school, there seemed to be a generally accepted idea that a work that has stood the test of time is somehow worthy of study. And a corollary to that was a work had to have some kind of deeper artistic meaning, which was somehow tarnished by popularity. I don't know why else I was assigned to read Pride and Prejudice or The Odyssey so many times. It's simply academic gatekeeping, but that's a topic for another sermon. The point is, Homer and Shakespeare and Dickens and Austen were making art, and they made it a long time ago, and so we should therefore study them. Now let's dispel those ideas. Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice was enormously popular, a commercial smash that sold out 3 printings in 1813, 1817. Shakespeare's plays were likewise enormously popular, and once I could experience them freed from the burden of high school English class, I discovered how joyously crude, hilarious, and absurdly violent they could be. Now, Dickens didn't set out to write massive, door-stopping epics. He was simply paid by the word. And what little we do know about the original oral traditions of the Odyssey paints a picture not of an artistic masterpiece, but of a campfire adventure story, equal parts Aesop fables and John Carter of Mars. Now, the point is not to denigrate these works, but instead to call out how arbitrary the distinctions are between academically approved art and pop culture. If something has meaning to you, if it's brought something to your life, it is worthy of study and criticism and examination. This is so fundamental to Unitarian Universalism that it is explicitly written as our second source of the living tradition. Words and deeds of prophetic people, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Which of course brings us to Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek. We're lucky that the UU source refers to prophetic people and not saints, because Roddenberry was anything but. Charitably, we could call him a man of his time. He was a soldier, a pilot, a police officer, a TV writer, a philanderer, a con man, and allegedly engaged in the type of behavior that would have sparked a Me Too reckoning half a century later. It's important that we know and recognize this truth and put him in the right context. But much like we do with Roddenberry's equally problematic contemporaries like JFK and John Lennon, we can still recognize the importance and impact of his words and ideas. Fundamentally, Gene Roddenberry's philosophy was 2 things, humanistic and optimistic. While he pitched Star Trek as wagon train to the stars, he saw in it the possibility to explore an optimistic view of the future, something rare in the 1960s at the height of the Cold War. Roddenberry and the many writers and actors and technicians and artists who turned his ideas into entertaining television envisioned a world in which people were defined not by who they are, where they were born, or what they look like, but by what they do. Roddenberry himself sums up the philosophy and its context. Quote, Star Trek speaks to some basic human needs, that there is a tomorrow. It's not all going to be over with a big flash and a bomb, that the human race is improving, that we have things to be proud of as humans. No, ancient astronauts did not build the pyramids. Human beings built them because they're clever and they work hard. And Star Trek is about those things. Now compare his most famous creation, Captain Kirk, with other iconic characters of recent pop culture. Harry Potter is important because his parents were wizards. Luke Skywalker is important because his parents are wizards. Batman is important because his parents were rich. But Captain Kirk is important because of what he does. He works hard to become an officer in a massive fleet, one of many responsible to lead and inspire a crew of hundreds of men and women and aliens and everything you can imagine to make quick decisions and put himself at risk for their sake, because, as Kirk himself says, risk is our business. Star Trek was also designed to use its far future setting to explicitly address controversial issues. Sometimes the metaphors were obvious. The aliens who are black on the left and white on the right, forever feuding with the otherwise identical aliens who are white on the left and black on the right, is one of the more famous and recognizable examples. Other episodes tackled the problems of unrestrained power, struggles for equal rights, sexism, racism, war, PTSD, and the constant fight to live up to one's own ideals. This humanist ethos and willingness to present such issues via the safe metaphor of science fiction makes the Star Trek franchise the perfect example through which to examine this month's theme, acceptance. Roddenberry himself wrote, Star Trek was an attempt to say that humanity will reach maturity and wisdom on the day that it begins not just to tolerate, but take a special delight in differences in ideas and differences in life forms. This is most readily apparent with the crew and the main cast. For the time it aired, the crew of the USS Enterprise was shockingly diverse, so much so that the network actually forced the cast to become less diverse when it went to the series after the original pilot was filmed. At the helm of the ship was an Asian man, often working in tandem with a Russian officer. And remember, this was only a few years after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Perhaps most striking was the inclusion of Lieutenant Uhura, the black comms officer who appeared on the bridge in nearly every episode. While the format of the show tended to focus on the leads of Kirk and Spock, the diverse crew was portrayed as all equally competent and dedicated. There is a famous story involving Nichelle Nichols, the actress who portrayed Uhura. She was concerned about behind-the-scenes disparities and other issues, and actually considered quitting the show in the first season. She was convinced to stay on by a fan of the show who knew how important it was for America to see a black woman on equal footing with white men. That fan, you might have heard of his name, it was Martin Luther King Jr. According to a 2011 interview with Nichols, quote, he said, "Don't you understand what this show has achieved? For the first time, we are being seen the world over as we should be seen." Martin Luther King says, "Do you understand that this is the only show that my wife Coretta and I will allow our children to stay up and watch?" I was speechless. End quote. Not only was Uhura a pivotal figure in inspiring future generations of actors, including fellow Star Trek alums Whoopi Goldberg and Sonequa Martin Green, but the character was a major inspiration for Mae Jemison, who became the first black woman in space in 1992. The cast diversity became a trademark for the franchise, and later series repeated this to varying degrees. When The Next Generation premiered in 1987, the cast featured multiple women in command-level roles, including the chief medical officer and security chief, and showed that not even blindness could stop a dedicated engineer. The first black lead of the Star Trek series came in 1993 when Commander Sisko took over Deep Space Nine, proving to be not only a passionate and empathetic leader, but an all too rare positive portrayal of black fatherhood on American television. Captain Janeway became the first female lead shortly thereafter, and the trend has continued to the point where, of the 3 Star Trek series currently in production, 2 are led by black women, and 1 features trans and non-binary characters actually played by trans and non-binary actors. Now, it's one thing to have a diverse cast, which could cynically be seen as fulfilling a quota or including a token character, but Star Trek also takes great pains to show acceptance of different cultures, philosophies, and even religions. And 2 examples come readily to my mind. First is the series' famous Prime Directive, the cause of and solution to many of the episodic conflicts over the decades. While the application is varied, the purpose of the directive has always been the same. We, meaning Starfleet in context, but in practice humanity, have no right to judge or interfere with the cultural practices of another civilization. It is a belief of practice. If it is sincerely held, we have no right to contradict it, no matter how abhorrent we find it. This is 3 UU principles in one: the inherent worth and dignity of others, the acceptance and encouragement of spiritual growth, and a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And this is the prime directive. When the writers of Star Trek designed their future utopia, this was their #1 rule. A second example of cultural acceptance comes from the lesser-known spin-off series Deep Space Nine. Now, I could talk for hours about this show, and I have, as my family will tell you. This is the high watermark of the franchise and a crown jewel in sci-fi television, but I'm going to try and stay focused. This was the first Star Trek show to explore long-term serialized story arcs and really depict major political and religious differences between the main characters. One of the major sources of conflict was the religious beliefs of the people of Bajor, an agrarian planet that was recovering from a brutal occupation and trying to rebuild itself with the assistance of the secular Federation. While the religious differences were a legitimate cause of disagreement, the show and the characters accepted these beliefs as valid. No attempt was ever made to convert or pressure Bajor to abandon their beliefs. It was simply the reality of the situation, no different from the climate or gravity on that planet. This push towards greater diversity and acceptance across race, gender identities, abilities, cultural backgrounds has not been perfect, nor has it been without its critics. The original series had its fair share of revealing costumes and objectified women, including Yeoman Rand, whose actor Grace Lee Whitney quickly left the show under clouded circumstances. Many rumors have circulated in the 5 decades since, ranging from simple budget cuts to workplace harassment to even alleged assault by an unnamed executive producer, most likely Gene Roddenberry himself. Star Trek was also infamously behind the curve when it came to LGBTQ issues, failing to address gay rights or the AIDS crisis in any meaningful way. In some cases, an attempt was made, but it was so watered down it came across as naive. In other cases, the attempts were outright vetoed by producers or TV executives. One clumsy attempt at exploring gender identity in an episode of The Next Generation featured a member of a single-sex species falling in love with a crewman. An interesting idea in theory, but in practice, it came across as a man so handsome he could seduce a lesbian. Star Trek did not feature a single gay character until 2017. And each step forward was accompanied by considerable backlash. Spock's makeup in 1966 had to be altered out of fears that it appeared too satanic. Southern stations in the US refused to air a 1968 episode featuring an interracial kiss, allegedly, but not actually the first one on American television. And over the years, many thousands of words have been written about the emotional stability of Captain Catherine Janeway that would never have been written about James Kirk or Jean-Luc Picard. See if you can spot the difference. And when one of the latest iterations, Star Trek Discovery, premiered with a Black female protagonist, the social media backlash was as absurd as it was severe. To those people who accuse Star Trek of being liberal propaganda, being too PC or SJW, I ask this: what show did you think you were watching? Star Trek has always had an explicitly political and philosophical agenda driven by its ideals of infinite diversity and infinite combinations. I bring up these flaws and failures and shortcomings not as criticism of the message, but as proof that this is hard. Even our best efforts and best intentions can fall in the face of our relentless pressure of our human flaws. These flaws can't simply be wiped off the ledger, canceled, and buried forever. They are part of the story, for better or worse. Gene Roddenberry, the flawed man himself, put it this way: it is the struggle itself that is most important. We must strive to be more than we are. It does not matter that we will not reach our ultimate goal. The effort itself yields its own reward. And that is why Star Trek has mattered so much to me, and why I think it can speak to all of us and our shared voyage in these difficult times. The effort, the struggle, that is the purpose. We must recognize our flaws and know we can do better. We must recognize that it's been a long road getting from there to here, but we must recognize that if we are clever and we work hard, if we trust ourselves and we trust each other, we can accomplish anything. We must not run from our past, and we must not fear the challenges of the future. As Commander Burnham puts it in Star Trek Discovery, being afraid of everything means you learn nothing. So the work, the human adventure, continues. And as we move forward towards a better future, fighting for acceptance and equality against fear and fascism, we can find comfort and inspiration in stories that simply show us what is possible. There is no such thing as the unknown, as Captain Kirk would say, and as was quoted earlier already, but there is only things temporarily hidden, temporarily not understood. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I agree with Gene Roddenberry when he said, I believe in humanity. We are an incredible species, but we're still a child creature. We're still being nasty to each other. And all children go through these phases. We're growing up, we're moving into adolescence now. And when we grow up, man, we're gonna be something. And I agree with Marcus Aurelius, 19 centuries ago, who wrote, look after each other. Life is short. The fruit of this life is good character and acts for the common good. And of course, I agree with Spock, who would simply say, live long and prosper. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. What a, a timely message for all of us. We'll continue on now with our Unison reading of the mission statement. Paul will put that on the screen and we will read it together. We agree to provide a safe place to celebrate diversity, draw inspiration for living better lives, foster social and environmental justice, and compassionately support each other in our spiritual searches. I'm sorry if I'm not 100% fluent in Roz's script, but I believe it is time now to extinguish our chalice. And do we have a closing hymn? Is that correct? No. Okay.
Just the postlude.
Okay, we will move on to the postlude.